than it was a thicker radiator. So you'd actually get better cooling with a 38 millimeter wide core instead of a 46, I think it was, something like that. So people are often quick to change that when in reality it's not really the right thing to do. And we've also found, you know, the pump impellers on the water pump, they're pushed on and they're plastic. You know, and there's two kinds of plastic, one that's broken and one that's going to break. But we find there is some variability in how far those are pressed on sometimes. So depending on how much clearance is between the pump impeller and the back of the chain case cover, that will affect pump efficiency quite a bit. So, you know, if all else fails and you still have a cooling issue, you know, that's one place you can always look to, is to see what kind of clearance you've got there. You want those impeller blades as close to that housing as you can get them, really, to really get the maximum efficiency out of it. Because the pump will start cavitating at about 4,500 engine RPM, and you don't get any more flow after that. So if you're running really high speed, extended periods of time, you're running in cavitation all the time. One way to circumvent that a little bit is to up the pressure on the system, put a higher relief pressure radiator cap on it. So we would run 28 to 30 psi caps on the ACRXs to improve the pump efficiency. But you got to make sure your hoses are in good shape, your clamps are in good shape, because it'll blow them off if you've got some marginal stuff. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Mr. Fields.
Since our dealers barely can spell ViperTech versus owns one, does Prefix do a full service on the vehicles? Okay. So you're doing that service. So they will service the vehicles. Do you know if you had any opportunities to hire any ViperTech for servicing centers? Or have you considered it?
Currently, we have a couple guys on staff that are very good. They're not dealership ViperTechs.
A lot of the ViperTechs right now don't use it enough to really be on top of it. They're stealing one, or unless you pay them under, you know, hire them on Saturday to work on it. It'd be interesting.
To answer your first question, yes, we do full service here. We do a lot more than just full service. We work a lot more on other cars as well.
Yes.
Specialty vehicles, more as you can see some of the cars that we have here. So having a specific ViperTech, we may not necessarily need that all the time. Most of our,
They have a question, you give them a call, right?
well, and most of the time, you know, we don't necessarily have to reach out to take that often. Most of the time, it's for an engine upgrade or something like that. If it's a tuning issue, yeah, Dick has a lot of knowledge on that. But Dale, who is my counterpart, who is not here today, couldn't make it, has many years of experience with the engine in the Viper car itself. Myself, I'm relatively new to the Viper community and Viper engines. Been involved with a lot of engines, a lot of different programs and stuff, but new to the Viper and the V10 series of things. A lot of it can be transferred over, but with the help of this gentleman, I'm learning quite quick.
And some of you Chrysler guys will know at least one of our techs is Todd Conley, which is Tim Conley's son. So, you know, that he comes from good genes, so to speak, and he's a very good tech, very good mechanic. And the other guy is a guy named Matt Adams. And if you're at all a Pontiac buff like I am, you remember a guy named Herb Adams, who developed kind of the Trans Am package back in the early 70s and mid 70s and so forth. That's Matt's dad. So he's got a lot of, he raced and did a lot of different stuff himself, so he's very good too. So we got two really good guys working out here that usually they figure stuff out pretty well for themselves. You don't have to mess with them. So. they need something, they come and ask.
Yeah. Question on the Viper engine. We have 5 generations. Can you interchange any of the generation of engines to any of our cars? And is any one particular engine better than another engine on different generations?
You mean like a,
Putting a Gen 5 engine into a Gen 1 car, one question. Or is, if you had your druthers on any of the vehicles, and maybe a Gen 4 engine might be better than a Gen 5, or a Gen 3 engine might be better than a Gen 4 and 5?
well, to me, the Gen 5 engine is the best. It's the pinnacle.
Okay.
You know, it had forged pistons, which the Gen 4 didn't. That's, to me, the main difference. The Gen 5 made a little more power for a lot of little reasons. The intake manifold, the camshaft was slightly different. The exhaust system had a little less back pressure. It was all little stuff that got that extra 40 horsepower. There wasn't any one big hitter. But the forged pistons made it certainly more reliable. You know, you could lean on it harder and not break a piston. But either the Gen 4 or the Gen 5 are certainly the best of the breed. They won't drop in a Gen 1 or Gen 2, I don't believe, without some sort of motor mount adapter, because the mounts are in a different location on the block, but it could be done. And you could certainly make it run. You know, we could certainly make it run in here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Being a full-service facility, have you solved, or do you know how to solve the Gen 2 rear axle clunch? Just simply latch reduction?
We have not looked into that. That particular car right there definitely has it.
Is that car there?
Yes. That particular yellow one there on the rack does have a,
No noise when it's cold, but when it warms up?
it makes it all the time.
Oh.
However, he's got aftermarket axles, he's got aftermarket positive traction unit in it, things like that. At first, when I heard it, I thought it was a pinion bearing going, but I haven't had a chance to look at it to see. Viper, a friend of mine owns transmission rear axle place down in Indiana, and has done a lot of work. The Viper rear axle is, in his opinion, one of the hardest to set up. So I don't know if it's, you know, don't know if it's a gear thing or if it's, you never know.
It always seemed when we looked at it that when it heats up, we had more lash than before. But the axle supplier never tightened up because you don't very well.
Al, that's a really good question. You know, the clunk that we have in a lot of the early cars, almost every car you can get at the clunk if you screw around with it enough, right? The clunk is really a summation of all of the clearances right from the wheels to the U-joints to the axle, differential, drive shaft, and then of course the transmission as well. And really, in the grand scale of things, the axle in the Viper is no different than a lot of other rear axles, right? It's got a high point gear set, it's got differential gears in it, and it's all a matter about how to set it up so that the lash is reduced. And of course, the tighter you make it, the more heat you generate, right? Of course, we got an aluminum case which expands. It's not an iron case. So there's little bits and pieces that add up to it. And then, you know, the calibration, and Dick and I have talked about this more than once, the sensitivity of the calibration on and off the throttle exacerbates that clunk as well.
So it's a good possibility the engine characteristics is contributing to it. That's why we hear it with Corvette F1.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing is the transmissibility of the noise, the way the axle is mounted, the way the rear trans mount is, all of that affects, you know, the dynamics of the system and how that noise gets transmitted to your ear. Trust me, I did the axle when we started the car, And that, that has plagued me all the way along the line about why does it have such axle clunk, yada,
It
yada.
didn't seem that car when we had a ladder bar. When we had a ladder bar, except for the speed movement, it didn't seem bad. But when we went to the direct mount above the net, it really amplified it because it's right there behind.
That may have had a lot to do with the transmissibility, that long arm off the nose of the axle to the back of the train.
Gen 5, the German Gen 5.
No, not.
They're certainly better because they've got hydraulic mounts.
Oh, okay.
The rear axle itself has
More hydraulic mounts. They're not hydraulic, but they're softer. So it's better all around too. It's,
Those hydraulic mounts adaptable?
now without frame changes. They go in. They kind of go in cups. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. But again, the Gen 5 isn't without some clunk too, but they're certainly better.
Keep in mind that Chevrolet had independent axles out in 1963. So they had a lot of years to look at that. By the time they came out with a very similar situation to the Nissan 44 center section aluminum, they've been looking at it for 20-some years before that car came out. Before
We looked at going to an iron case for Gen 5 for various reasons. One was that it was getting pretty close to its limit for durability. You'd break the case at the kind of power levels we were making with the tires we had, the grip you could get and stuff. So it was marginal. We really thought about an iron case, but it added a lot of weight. It was a big expense to tool it and so on and so forth. So we ended up not doing it. But it was considered.
When we were chasing it and looking at it, we were talking about lash changing and obviously pumping out. The thinner the fluid, the more likely you're going to get that. Tacit re-snare, lower down the road. But we haven't really had anything to address that.
Well, we always considered that you could change the fluid, especially in the transmission, neutral gear rattle issue. But the same thing goes for the axle in terms of the viscosity. And the other thing is, we got into the later generations, the fluid was actually doing two jobs. It was lubricating the gear set, but it was also had a major effect on the frictional characteristics of the differential and limited slip. So the characteristics of the fluid were different because it was really doing two different jobs.
And along those same lines, on our chassis dyno, we looked at one car a while back that's we changed was it the fluid in the trans or the did? We changed the trans fluid from I don't know, it was like a 10-150 or something that was in it. It was a thick oil that was in it.
Put in the original about 70, 80 or 35, 80 early trans oil, which was a thicker oil.
And then went to the ATF.
And we went to tested that and tested Royal Purple Synchromatic and ATF house.
And there was like 30 horsepower rear wheel difference between them. It was a lot. So that's why OEMs don't use chassis dynos for horsepower numbers, but among others. But you have to be careful with some of that.
Do we have the same lockup mechanism limited slip as, let's say, Chevy has in there?
I'm not sure what Chevy has. Your point about the engine, it's an on-fire engine, obviously. That probably doesn't help things. I don't know how much it hurts it, though, to be honest. Yeah, you get a bit of a spike, and then you get between the banks, you get a big drop, and then comes back up, and then the bank fires 54 degrees later instead of 90, so you get another spike and a smaller drop, and so you got this kind of weird pattern of torque that's actually going down to the axle that you know, theoretically could aggravate things a little bit.
They just bring something like you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In other words, we are where we are, we're still there at this point.
Did you mention about the stack up on all the components, maybe adding to the clump? General Motors was using a composite differential. Would something like that change the characteristics of all the downplay
Composite differential or a composite shaft?
shaft?
Yeah. I wouldn't think so. Those composite shafts are pretty stiff.
Okay.
So I wouldn't think they would improve that situation.
That's more related to critical speed and stiffness of the shaft. I mean, once you get past a certain point, the shaft isn't going to do this because it's just past that point where it's basically solid.
I would think an aluminum shaft would actually have more flex to it than a composite shaft.
From an acoustic standpoint, the aluminum might actually be better.
Yeah. I have a funny story about a composite shaft, just it's unrelated, but it's a funny story. We were running touring car, which was the 2-liter race engine that we had in the North American Touring Car Series, because I was in charge of that engine program. And we were having all kinds of troubles with the drive shafts from the engine to the dyno, the cells up at CTC. And so we were working with the axle supplier, the shaft supplier for the dynos. And he came up with this, composite shaft. And said this, low inertia, lightweight, it'll do the job for us. So we spent buku bucks on these shafts. And we ran the thing and, it seemed to work pretty well. And then one day we were up, we're sitting at 8,000 RPM or something, sitting there doing some tuning, and all of a sudden the thing ran away, and it shut down. And we went in, we were looking around, and the shaft was gone. And you look all over, and there's no trace of it. It had just gone away. It was bizarre. Splintered into small enough pieces we couldn't find it. Then we had another one, and when we went in there and the prop shaft guard was loose, there was no prop shaft in there. It's like, well, where'd that one go? So you look all over the place, and I'm standing there looking. Finally, I looked up, and there was a hole in the ceiling about the diameter of that prop shaft. That thing had gone straight up through the ceiling in the dyno, and it was laying up, in the mezzanine kind of area. That's why they have prop shaft guards. In this case, it wasn't latched or something because it came out.
More questions? Do you have experience with X2 builders?
Yes.
Good, bad, or different? How about the other ones out there? Larry, Hartrat?
Oh, that's good.
It's also good. Thank you.
I do want to mention, is Will here? Where'd Will go? Will's here. So, speaking of good Viper techs and good places to get your cars worked on, Will, right there, he's out at Jackson area, right? Also full service, does a lot of stuff, and he can also help. He's got a good line for tires, if anybody's looking for tires. And you're going to host the Fall Tech. So we'll get to learn a lot more. So if you're not local to this area, Will's closer to that side of town, and is a great resource all the way around. So very helpful. So.
Yeah, Will was one of our mechanics that worked out of the proving grounds. He still does, actually. But he was one of our Viper techs that would go on a lot of the trips with us to the various places we would go. So he was privy to all of our secrets.
I forgot all of it.
But yeah, he's a very good resource, and we're lucky to have him.
Any other questions?
Does Motor City Viper Club have a listing every